Chapter 34, Part 2, The Cantatas after 1734, continued. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. J.S. Bach, Volume 2 by Albert Schweitzer, translated by Ernest Newman. Chapter 34, Part 2, The Cantatas after 1734, continued. Even Bach could not cast into a correct musical period the formless passage from Micah on which the first chorus of the cantata, Es ist dir gesagt, Mensch, number 45, is based. The many reiterations of the It is said unto thee at the commencement are quite disconcerting. It is incomprehensible why Bach should set himself the impossible task of making a chorus of this verse instead of declaiming it in a simple arioso, as he does in the second part with Christ's words, Es werden viele auch mehr sagen an jenem Tag. We also possess the parts of this cantata revised and corrected by Zelter. They throw a doubtful light on his way of relieving Bach's work of its thin tinsel and bringing out the bright substance immediately underneath. His alterations are really ludicrous. We get the idea that his purpose was to substitute for Bach's intelligent declamation the most unintelligent that can be conceived. The following cantatas deal with only one biblical passage each. Es ist ein trotzig und verzagt Ding, number 176 for Trinity. Wer Dank opfert, number 17 for the 14th Sunday after Trinity. Unser Mund sei voll Lachens, number 110 for Christmas. Wir müssen durch viel Trübsal in das Reich Gottes eingehen, number 146 for the 3rd Sunday after Easter. The cantata Wer Dank opfert, number 17, consists of a large and sharply chiseled chorus and two interesting arias. The text, unfortunately, is a poor one. In the first chorus of Es ist ein trotzig und verzagt Ding, number 176, the orchestral parts of the accompaniment to the theme are marked first forte, then piano. This makes it probable that Bach had the chorus theme also sung forte at first, and piano from the middle onwards. Thus. Es ist ein trotzig und versagt Ding alle Menschenherzen. On closer inspection, the whole chorus is seen to be planned on the idea of this direct transition from forte to piano. This way of representing the antithesis between trotzig, arrogant, and versagt, poor-spirited, may appear somewhat naive, but the musical effect is natural and not without charm. The soprano aria, Dein sonst hell beliebter Schein, is set in march rhythm, like a gavotte, the words being those that Nicodemus speaks to himself on his night journey to Jesus. The lengthy orchestral preludes to each of these cantatas explain how Bach came to employ many of his free orchestral compositions for church works. The chorus of the cantata, Unser Mund sei voll Lachens, number 110, is worked into the allegro section of the second D major overture, BG 30, page 66, and so framed between the first and final grave, footnote. On the insertion of this vocal movement in the overture, see Volume 1, where the theme of the allegro is quoted, end footnote. The chorus of the cantata Wir müssen durch viel Trübsal, number 146, is inserted into the adagio of the clavier concerto in D minor, BG 17, and is prefaced by an organ transcription of the allegro. In neither case has Bach made the arrangement without regard to the character of the text. The triplet rhythm of the D major overture seems really a musical representation of laughter, so that it has been conjectured, not without reason, that the overture may have originated at the same time as the cantata, and that the theme of the middle section was written with an eye to the words Unser Mund sei voll Lachens, our mouth is filled with laughter. Footnote. The duet sei Gott in this cantata is a transcription of the Virgo Jesse Floruit that originally formed part of the Magnificat in D major, CBG 11. End footnote. The elegiac mood of the adagio in the D minor concerto harmonizes excellently with the words Wir müssen durch viel Trübsal in das Reich Gottes eingehen. We must, through much tribulation, enter into the kingdom of God. End footnote. The solo movements of the last named cantata are of extraordinary beauty, even their excessive length, which they share with the other arias of this period, cannot prejudice us against them. In the soprano aria, Ich sei mein Absaren mit bangem Herzen, I sow my tears with a heavy heart, the two oboes let fall a tear in each bar. The duet between tenor and bass, Wie will ich mich freuen, is one of the loveliest and sweetest of the movements constructed on a joy motive. The cantata for Whit Sunday, O ewiges Feuer, number 34, is shown by the existence of a set of older parts to be founded on a mourning cantata of the same title. Footnote. The declamation of the revised text is not always faultless, as may be seen from the first chorus. End footnote. The semiquaver figures of the first violins run through the whole of the first chorus like the lambent flames that are to set the heart on fire. The exquisite lulling music of the alto aria Wohl euch ich auf so walten schielen is not fully explained by its present text. This is one of the cases in which the mere knowledge of Bach's musical language is sufficient to make us decide that the music was originally written for another text. Footnote. The theme belongs to the category of the cradle song motives. End footnote. The splendid chorus Friede über Israel seems to have been abbreviated from its original form. The music of the cantata for Midsummer Day, Freudig erlöscht Schar, number 30, is derived from the secular cantata Angenehmes Wiederau, which Bach wrote in honor of Christian von Hennick, who was fated on the 28th of September 1737. Only the introductory chorus of the sacred arrangement, it recurs at the end, can now be performed. The declamation, indeed, is not always quite natural, and the words have clearly been written to fill up a prescribed verse form rather than to express a poetical idea. But we forget all this in view of the positively startling force of the music. Perhaps no other of Bach's works equals this in fire and splendor of sonority. Anyone who could supply the music with a new and singable text, suitable, say, for Christmas, would be doing Bach a great service. In the solo numbers, the fitting in of the text is so outrageous from the musical and declamatory point of view as to be unendurable. Some magnificent music is thus going to waste. It would be a worthy task for some poet to provide the secular cantata with an expressive poem and so restore this grand music to the world. Footnote. The secular cantata can easily be restored from the cantata Freudig erlöscht Schar, BG 5, and the supplement. Of course, there is no necessity to preserve all the recitatives. End footnote. The few solo cantatas of this period, the end of the 30s, that we possess relate almost exclusively to Christmas and Epiphany. Footnote. Selig ist der Mann, number 57 for soprano and bass for the second day of Christmas. Süße Trost, mein Jesu kommt, number 151 for soprano, alto, tenor and bass for the third day of Christmas. Liebste Jesu, mein Verlangen, number 32 for bass and soprano for Epiphany. Meine Seufzer, meine Tränen, number 13 for soprano, alto, tenor and bass for the second Sunday after Epiphany. Es reifet euch sin schrecklich Ende, number 90, for alto, tenor, and bass, for the 25th Sunday after Trinity. End footnote. In the cantata Selig ist der Mann, number 57, there is a dialogue between Jesus, bass, and the believing soul, soprano. The first bass arioso delivers in expressive music the words, "Blessed is the man that endureth temptation, for when he is tried, he shall receive the crown of life." The orchestra adds a symphonic accompaniment. Bach would have worked out his solos wholly in this ideal form had not the da capo aria been the fashion of the day. The moving lament of the soul, "Ich wünschte mir den Tod, wenn du, mein Jesu, mich nicht liebtest," is set in the same free arioso style. An idea of the overwhelming sorrow expressed in the accompaniment can be had from the opening bars for the first violin. In the succeeding vivace, which is somewhat in the style of an aria, Jesus comforts the soul with the song of triumph. Ja, ja, ich kann die Feinde schlagen. The words of the middle section, "Bedrängter Geist, hör auf zu weinen," cease to weep, O afflicted soul, are set to wonderfully expressive music, the violins having a motive suggestive of sighs. Ich ende behende mein irdisch Leben, sings the joyous soul, happy to meet its death in an aria with an animated 3/4 rhythm, as if it were hastening from this world to its Redeemer, leaping and dancing on its way. Footnote. It is not clear why Spitta should regard this cantata as domestic religious music rather than music for the church. There is nothing in Bach's works to justify a distinction of this kind. End footnote. The cantata for the third day of Christmas, "Susse Trost, mein Jesu kommt, Jesus wird einst geboren," number 151 for soprano, alto, tenor, and bass, consists, apart from the recitatives, simply of 2 arias and the final chorale. In the first aria, the strings, piano sempre, sing a lullaby over the infant Jesus. To which the flute adds exuberant runs and figures. The theme of the alto aria, "In Jesu Demut kann ich Trost in seiner Armut Reichtum finden," is constructed on the same lines as that of "Gern will ich mich bekämen" in the St. Matthew Passion. It represents humility, Demut. It sinks, rises, sinks again recovers, and in the final cadence quite goes to pieces, as it were. The ties that Bach has marked for the instruments here are particularly instructive. The indications in the orchestral part as to the cooperation of the strings and the oboe are interesting in themselves, and no doubt applicable to many other scores. They play unisono until a piano comes, when the violins cease, leaving the oboe to continue alone. The opening aria of the cantata "Liebst du Jesu mein Verlangen," number 32, dialogue for bass and soprano, reminds us strongly of the first movement, so full of longing, of the secular cantata "Weicht nur betrübt Schatten," BG 11. In the final duet, vivace, between the believing soul and Jesus, all care is driven away before the joyous rushes of the instruments. The theme runs thus, the oboes always hurrying along with the strings. The second violins and the violas fly about in loud staccato quavers throughout the movement. In the bass aria of the cantata for the second Sunday after Epiphany, "Meine Säufer, meine Tränen," number 13 for soprano, alto, tenor, and bass, we have one of Bach's most remarkable dual themes. It begins with the sigh motive, which is immediately followed by the motive of joy. The text that Bach wished to express by means of this juxtaposition runs thus: Groans and piteous weeping bring no relief to care, but he who looks towards heaven will find a joyous light shining in his sorrowful bosom. The introductory aria and the chorale with orchestral accompaniment, Der Gott, der mit hat zugesprochen, are very somber in tone. In the first aria of the cantata for the 25th Sunday after Trinity, Es reifet euch ein schrecklich Ende, number 90, Bach declaims the word schrecklich, dreadful, several times in this fashion.
Ein schrecklich Ende.
In the passionate final aria, So loschet im Eifer der Rachen, richte den Leuchte des Wortes so straff doch aus, confused demi-semi-quaver passages fly up and down in the various instruments like a flame struggling against the storm wind. Even Spitta frankly admits Bach's pictorial intention here. Footnote. Bach has represented the flickering of flames in other places. End footnote. It is one of the most powerful symphonic accompaniments to be found in all Bach's works. The most glorious feature of these solo cantatas is that the German Bach here finds free expression. It is true that for many movements he still retains the da capo form. We are hardly conscious of it, however, for it is so changed that he seems to have risen superior to it. Where he still employs the repetitive scheme of the da capo aria, he very often does away with the identity of the vocal and the instrumental theme. He thus makes a peculiarly delightful type of aria. The texts of these solo cantatas are, as a rule, expressive. At this very time, about 1736, Bach became weary of the search for free poems for his church pieces, and definitely resolved to revert to the chorale cantata and to write a cycle of works in this genre. We may probably assume that this kind of cantata struck him as being the most suitable to the church, and that consequently he wished to make a year's cycle of this kind the culminating point of his labor for the service. By an evil fate, he halted halfway on the path that led back to the choral cantata. The admirable older cantata, with its text compounded out of chorale verses and biblical passages, does not enter his mind now. What he wants is a chorale cantata that will permit him to retain the speaking recitative and the da capo aria. He will not again endeavor to set hymn strophes as recitatives and da capo arias, as he did at the beginning of the 30s. Picander offers to cast the chorale strophes into madrigal form for him. Footnote. These cantatas also contain free aria texts. End footnote. Bach agrees, and so seals the fate of the cantata texts to which he devotes his final labors. Nor is it comprehensible from the purely musical standpoint how Bach could remain satisfied with this kind of chorale cantata, as it compelled him to renounce all freedom in the choice of the form for his choruses. We rather get the impression that the sacrifice was not a serious one for him. He seems to have wearied of looking for pictures in which he could express his ideas, and felt a certain relief in being absolved from the search and having simply one task before him: to keep a chorale melody going as a cantus firmus in the soprano, and to build up the other voices line by line in motet form. Indeed, while all these choruses are plainly signed with his name, no two of them are alike, in spite of their having the same scheme in common. Each of them has a personality of its own. Bach accepts as a necessary evil the fact that in choruses of this kind he can introduce the text only in melodic segments separated by interludes, and so has to dismember sentences that are one and indivisible from both the declamatory and the intellectual point of view. Moreover, he can give only limited expression in his choruses to the poetry of the text, since he cannot employ themes of his own invention. Thus it comes about that the main work of musical representation in these choruses devolves upon the orchestra, which, as a rule, has no concern at all for the melody, but weaves round the chorale and its figuration a free fantasia in which the basic idea or emotion of the text finds characteristic expression. The themes and motives of this orchestral accompaniment throw a great deal of light on the nature of Bach's musical language. In the arias of these chorale cantatas he is more than usually dependent upon his poet. Very often the latter gives him a mere formless and senseless mass of ideas compiled out of one or more chorale verses, quite unsuitable for music, and, moreover, necessitating arias of excessive length. Now and then, however, Picander has succeeded in fastening upon the characteristic point of the verse and expressing it concisely, so that the cantatas contain some arias of surpassing beauty. Many of these cantatas do not form a poetic whole, the text being lacking in natural dramatic structure. In the cantatas that are more lyrical in feeling, this defect is not so noticeable, which explains our finding the pearls of the collection among them. In all these chorale cantatas, however, we have not only the last but the deepest expression of Bach's piety. His music shows how deeply he has been penetrated by these hymns. He has chosen them as the basis of his cantatas because he lives and moves and has his being in them, and finds in them all his thoughts and emotions in their fullest form. And as Bach, the man of piety, feels thus, it hardly occurs to Bach the artist that he is renouncing his freedom. The scores of this year's cycle of chorale cantatas became Friedemann's at the division of his father's property, as we learn from a letter of Forkel, dated 3rd of April, 1803. Footnote. Dorfel, who communicates this fragment, does not tell us the name of the addressee of the letter from which it is taken. End footnote. Quote, I have had in my house the whole year's cycle that was in the possession of Wilhelm Friedemann Bach, the one that is so excellently written upon chorale melodies. Friedemann Bach was at that time in great distress, and asked me 20 louis d'or for the complete property in the cycle, or 2 louis d'or for the loan of them. I was not rich enough to put down the 20 louis d'or all at once, but I could afford the 2. As it would have cost me more than 20 louis d'or to have had all the cantatas copied that half year, I resolved to copy some of the best movements myself for my 2 louis d'or. I consequently possess now only 2 works written upon the chorales Es ist das Heil uns kommen her and Wo Gott der Herr nicht bei uns halt. Both are extraordinarily beautiful. The whole collection, for which I was asked 20 louis d'or, Friedemann was compelled by want to sell for 12 thalers. I do not know who bought it. End quote. B.F. Richter conjectures, not improbably, that the purchaser was Doles, the cantor of St. Thomas's. It is more than doubtful, however, whether the cycle was then complete. Rochlitz mentions only 26 chorale cantatas of Bach as belonging to Doles. Footnote. See, on this question, his interesting article Über die Schicksale der Thomas Schul zu Leipzig angehörenden Kantaten J.S. Bach in the Bach-Jahrbuch for 1906. End footnote. The parts of these cantatas remained in the possession of Bach's widow. When, in 1752, she asked the council for a grant, she was given 40 thalers, quote, on account of her poverty and in return for certain pieces of music. End quote. According to Richter, these were the parts of the cycle of chorale cantatas which, however, appear not to have been complete. Some of these chorale cantatas were intended, according to Spitter's chronology, for the year 1735. For example, the New Year's cantata Jesu nun sei gepreiset, number 41. The joy motive dominates the orchestra in the first part of the chorus, the 2 trumpets working out the following splendid configuration. Footnote. It is quite possible that some chorale cantatas of an earlier date, such as Ein feste Burg and Christus der ist mein Leben, also belonged to this cycle. Bach did not arrange his works to suit the season, as he was always performing the older cantatas again. He made up the present yearly cycle of chorale cantatas by taking up a number of pre-existent works of this kind and adding others for the Sundays that were lacking until the cycle was complete. Of the 5 cycles that he left at his death, 2 must have consisted of chorale cantatas, those of which the St. Thomas's school possessed the parts. The cantatas now to be discussed belong without exception to his later years. End footnote. At the words "Das wär in guter Still," where the praise gives way to prayer, the joy motive ceases in the accompaniment and does not return until near the end, where the prayer "Behut Leib, Ziel und Leben hinfort durch ganz Jahr" is repeated. The final chorale is interwoven with the trumpet fanfares of the first chorus. The 2 arias rank among the most beautiful of Bach's lyrics. In the accompaniment to the first chorus of the cantata for the 9th Sunday after Trinity, Was frage ich nach der Welt, number 94, which also seems to date from 1735, Bach gives flying figures to the flute and first violins, while the other strings have staccato quavers. This is how he elsewhere depicts someone running. The staccato quavers are especially characteristic. He is therefore not expressing here the rather contemplative mood of the text, but the hastening of the soul to withdraw itself from the world. Only when we know the meaning of the orchestral accompaniment can we find the right tempo for this superb and closely woven movement and the right way of performing it. The first chorus of the cantata for the 19th Sunday after Trinity, Wo soll ich fliehen hin, number 5, contains a similar piece of orchestral painting. In the aria Ergieß dich rechtlich, du gottlich Kerl, ach walle mit blutigen Stromen auf mich, pour forth abundantly over me, O divine stream of blood, a solo viola keeps up a delightful flowing and murmuring obbligato. The chief motive of this accompaniment recurs in the great orchestral symphony to the first chorus of the cantata Christ unser Herr zum Jordan kam, number 7. The aria Wer stumm hollen Herr is also extremely effective. The solos in the cantata Was frage ich nach der Welt, number 94, however, suffer from the poor quality of the texts. The cantata for the 3rd day of Christmas, Ich freu mich in dir, number 133, seems also to have been written for the year 1735. The scantily figured chorale is sung to a simple orchestral accompaniment based on the naive joy motive, consisting of continuous semiquaver passages, of which we have a typical specimen in the chorale prelude Lobt Gott ihr Christen allzugleich, Peters 5, number 40. This mode of expressing joy is frequently used in the Christmas chorale cantatas. This chorus shows us the risks that the declamation has to run even in the simplest chorale figuration. In 2 places, Bach phrases thus.
Ach wie ein süßer Ton.
In the chorus of the cantata Was frage ich nach der Welt, number 94, there is a passage in which, if he does not divide the syllables of a word by a pause, as in the foregoing example, he separates the words in a way hardly less objectionable.
Wenn ich mich nur an dir.
The 2 arias of the Christmas cantata are very characteristic. The first begins with the cry,
Getrost, getrost, getrost.
In the second, Wie lieblich klingt es in den Ohren dies Wort, mein Jesus ist geboren. How exquisitely do these words ring in the ear, my Jesus is born. Bach cannot forbear making the violins illustrate the ringing at the words klingt es in den Ohren. We possess 3 Christmas cantatas belonging to this cycle. The cantata Gelobet seist du Jesu Christ, number 91, is intended for the first day. The chorus is naturally based on the joy motive. The tenor aria, accompanied by 3 oboes, is a charming lullaby. In the duet Die Armut so Gott auf sich nimmt, God takes poverty on himself, the violins have a unisono theme in the rhythm of solemnity, symbolizing the celestial majesty of Jesus, while the voices tell us of the human form that makes us equal to the angels. Footnote. When performing this fine work, it is best to leave out the recitative with chorale Der Glanz der höchsten Herrlichkeit. End footnote. In the cantata for the second day of Christmas, Christum wir sollen loben schon, number 121, the chorus is treated in pure motet style. The orchestra duplicates the voices. One is inclined to regret that Bach did not employ this form more frequently in his chorale choruses. The curious music in the aria Johannes freudevolles Springen erkannt dich, mein Heiland schon, can only be explained on the supposition that Bach is representing the leaping of the child in Elizabeth's womb at the greeting of Mary. The barbarous declamation in the tenor aria is in itself sufficient to show that the music has been taken from another source. It is incomprehensible how Bach could listen to it. In the cantata for the Sunday after Christmas, Das Neugeborene Kinderlein, number 12, the chorus and orchestra have some lullaby music, about the performance of which Bach was so particular that he has supplied it most carefully with phrasing marks. This movement is especially instructive with regard to the echo effects that he uses in his orchestral works. The theme, the beauty of which comes to a great extent from the splendid symmetry of its form, begins thus. In the recitative Die Engel, welch sich zuvor vor euch als vor verfluchten Scheuten erfüllen nun die Luft im hohen Chor, the chorale is played by the 3 flutes. The chorale trio, O wohl uns, for soprano, alto and tenor, in which the alto has the melody, is accompanied by the orchestral basses with the angel motive, Bach taking it to represent the song of the angels in the hohen Chor, or choir on high. Footnote. It is identical with those of the pastoral symphony of the Christmas oratorio and the accompaniment to the chorale Wir singen dir in deinem Heer in the same work, which ends the angel's song sei Gott in der Ho. End footnote. The cantata for Epiphany, Liebster Emmanuel, number 123, is one of the finest expressions of Bach's mysticism. Its first chorus reminds us a good deal of that of the cantata Du Herd Israel, number 104. Liebster Emmanuel, cry the orchestra, all the instruments repeating continually the opening phrases of the melody.
Liebster Emmanuel.
It suggests a crowd of people appealing to the Lord, whose glory has just been revealed in baptism, to be allowed to kiss the hem of his garment. The text is very beautiful. Liebster Emmanuel, Herzog der Frommen, du meiner Seelen Heil, komm nur bald. Du hast mir höchster Schatz mein Herz genommen, so ganz vor Liebe brennt und Nacht die Wald. Nichts kann auf Erden mir liebres werden, als wenn ich meinen Jesum stets behalt. After this chorus, the tenor sings of the cruel way to the cross, the 2 oboe d'amore adding an expressive lament. At the end comes the joyous march song Lass so Welt mich aus Verachtung, in which the soul bids the world farewell. Unless we know from other scores of Bach what is meant by the staccato quavers in the basses and the hurrying figures in the flute, we are apt to render this music wrongly, failing to perceive the joyousness and urgency of it, and reading into it the rather elegiac mood of the text. The first chorus of the cantata for the first Sunday after Epiphany, Meinem Jesum lass ich nicht, number 124, must be sung with particular delicacy in order that it may not cover up the runs of the oboe d'amore concertante, in which Bach has expressed the whole of the fervour that he has seen in the text. In the moving aria, Und wenn der hart Todesschlag, and when the cruel blow of death, the terrors of death are 3 times overcome by the words, Ich lasse meinen Jesum nicht, my Jesus will I never leave. The strings incessantly accompany the poignant song of the oboes with the blow of death. This ceases each time the words Ich lass meinen Jesum nicht recur. This movement only makes its full effect when the strings give a really terrifying expression to their semiquavers with a heavy accent on each note. The final duet between soprano and alto, Entzieht dich eilends mein Herz der Welt, is more effective when sung by several voices. Footnote. Simple duets and trios for the final numbers are characteristic features of many of these later chorale cantatas. End footnote. This method of performance may be recommended again for the joyous final duet Wenn Sorgen auf mich dringen of the cantata for the second Sunday after Epiphany, Ach Gott, wie manches Herzeleid, number 3, second composition. In the first chorus of this work, the cantus firmus is in the bass, an unusual position. In the sorrowful orchestral accompaniment, we hear with a special clearness the sighs of the first violins. The march-like character given to the movement by the remaining strings and the orchestral basses has been suggested to Bach by the text, which speaks of the narrow and calamitous way that leads to heaven. In the recitative with chorale, Wie schwerlich lasst sich Fleisch und Blut zwingen zu dem ewigen Gut, the stubborn basso ostinato symbolizes the word zwingen, to force. In the cantata for the third Sunday after Epiphany, Was mein Gott will, das G'sech Alsace, number 111, the spirited accompaniment, founded on the joy motive, to the introductory chorus shows that Bach interpreted the words of the beautiful chorale, God's will be done, not in the sense of quiet submission, but in that of joyous and confident faith. The chorus, in which the violins have runs of this kind, must be sung jubilantly and triumphantly. The duet for alto and tenor, So geh ich mit Herzensschritten und wenn mich Gott zum Grabe führt, I go with courageous steps, even though God be leading me to the grave, is like a gladsome stately march. The voices are accompanied at their entry by the following figures in the first violins. All the music for the Feasts of Mary in this cycle has survived. The cantata Mit Fried und Freud fahr ich dahin, number 125, was written for the purification. In the first chorus we seem to hear the weary, uncertain steps of the pilgrim of heaven. The other instruments have a similar motive, alternating with a triplet figure that is full of inexpressible felicity. In the beautiful aria Ich will auch mit gebrochenen Augen, we almost get the impression that Bach is continuing to depict the steps, only that the music now, as in the duet So geh ich mich Herzensschritten in the cantata last mentioned, represents a more assured and joyous procession. End of chapter 34, part 2.